My guest today is Ramie, CEO of Dibba Oysters, the UAE's largest oyster farm, largest and only oyster farm.
Yeah.
We will be talking about aquaculture, the opportunities that we see of producing oysters in the UAE, and the potential of exporting, and the sustainability metrics in oyster farming.
Dibba Bay was founded in 2016. There was obviously a big build-up to that founding. We were doing pilot studies. We were getting, as I'm sure you're aware, it's not straightforward getting the permits and the licensing when you're doing something for the first time. And saying that, though, I mean, on a global scale, I got my aquaculture permits extremely quickly. So if I was trying to do a new species in a country in Europe, 10 years to get all the approvals. So over time, I've felt more and more lucky about how quickly it actually went at the beginning. So 2016 we got going. Very small, humble beginnings. One shipping container in the middle of the port, and 100-meter long line, and about 100 baskets, and that's how we got going. Today, I think we've got almost 100 lines, and we've got a whole onshore facility, and we've really grown very, very rapidly, and we're very proud of our current output.
I'm well aware about the sustainability of oysters, but can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so oyster farming, shellfish farming, is probably the most sustainable form of farming that there is. So they
across all animal protein
across the board. Okay. Yeah. So obviously, it's well documented the amount of carbon that's produced through beef farming, for example. So they're the sort of the worst.
In that world, I think poultry eggs are the lowest.
Yeah, well, but oyster farming is like less than 0.5% of the carbon output compared to beef for producing per kilo.
Incredible.
So it's just off the charts different. So the reason for that is the oysters they're out in the ocean. They're feeding naturally. Yeah. So you don't have to feed them. It's not like fish farming where you're manufacturing feed and capturing wild fish to make that feed. It's they just feed naturally on the phytoplankton in the ocean.
So that would be called primary feeders, correct?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. And so we have a very productive ocean across in Fujairah, and by productive I mean there is a lot of phytoplankton in the water. There's a lot of nutrients, and so therefore that supports the whole ecosystem there. So there's a lot of fish there. There's a lot of life in the ocean, and so the oysters feed naturally there, and they also sequester carbon in their shell. So when they build their shell, they're sequestering carbon. So it's not just that they're not having a negative impact; they're actually having a positive impact. Okay. So that's the really wonderful thing about them, and of course as well from a taste perspective, we are farming them, but they're feeding naturally. So there's no actual difference between an oyster that's sitting on a rock on the seabed or hanging in our baskets. They're feeding on the same wild phytoplankton. So this is what gives them such a lovely taste profile, and a changing taste profile throughout the year as they're feeding on different types of phytoplankton.
Okay. Somebody who's in farming, we deal a bit with poultry farming. Having a production that doesn't need inputs of feed, I think is an incredible, this is something that doesn't happen across any of the agriculture chains, right? And this is the biggest cause of carbon footprint, really, the feed, the inputs. Yeah. So then the two other things that we would need sometimes in farming are climate control and so we would have the feed, we would have the climate control, and then we would have the antibiotic use or the chemical use. Yeah. So in terms of those things.
So we use no chemicals and no antibiotics throughout the whole process. Yeah. So we take the oysters out and we manually clean them. So like we'll chip predators off of them and what have you, and we will spray them with seawater. And so at the end of the process, when we're harvesting them, we do a thing called depuration, where we're actually cleansing the actual animal themselves.
Okay.
But this is simply, we fill tanks with seawater, recirculate it, and put it through a UV light. So, and that
kills the bacteria.
Yeah, so it sterilizes the seawater, but just with light. And then the oysters sit and they suck that sterilized seawater through their bodies and it cleanses them out. And it's for safety reasons and also mainly shelf life reasons because they get nice.
So then you can consume it without having any issues.
Yeah. So no chemicals, no antibiotics. They feed naturally. I mean, it's kind of like just sort of wild animals feeding on grass. I mean, like they're just it's
grazing.
Yeah.
But in a place like UAE, in something that's abundant, which we don't really see the phytoplankton.
Yeah, and that's and you talked about climate control. I mean, it's this species of oyster. It's not endemic to this area. However, this species, because of its adaptability to a broad range of temperatures, has been used for farming all over the world. I mean, there's hundreds of species of oysters. But this species, the Pacific cupped oyster, accounts for 90% of the world's farmed oysters.
Okay.
And so it's highly adaptable, and it's a wonderful situation where we're able to farm just in the open ocean. We don't have to play with the temperature. We don't have to introduce feed. It's they're growing quite happily on their own in this environment.
And it's a product that the international market is already acquainted with. It's the same variety of oysters.
Yeah.
When it comes to length of production, do you have any limitations on, or how would you compare that to oysters in France or Japan?
So it would probably use France as a comparison. They're the biggest exporter of oysters. So to get a market size oyster in France takes at least 3 years.
Yeah.
Here it takes us about 8 months.
Okay.
And when I talked previously about the productivity of our ocean. It's chock full of food, and it's warm. So the heat speeds up the metabolism of the oyster, which, if there wasn't those levels of food, would be a problem because they wouldn't be able to slow down, and there was not the food to support that growth. Yeah. But we have this lovely combination in Fujairah of we've got very deep water, very close to the shore, so we get a nice upwelling of nutrients and slightly cooler water, so it's not as hot as over here in Dubai, and we get just this perfect combination of temperature and nutrients and food that allows them to have this really, really fast growth, and that also gives it affects the taste profile as well, because they're actually out in the ocean getting buffeted around. Whereas a lot of oysters from other parts of the world, France for example, they'll be coming out of estuaries where they're just like sitting
very shallow.
Yeah, they're not really moving, and so our oysters have this lovely big developed muscle in the adductor muscle. It's the same as you would eat from a scallop. Yeah. And so they've got they're muscular, firm textured oysters, which is actually very, very good for first timers who don't like the gloopiness of a big sort of European oyster. So they're a bit firmer, so they're good for first timers, and then they're also for connoisseurs of oysters. It's still an oyster, but the texture is a little bit different, and you can really appreciate that.
I think with France, the success they found in their food industry is creating the premiumized. What would they say? The provenance. The provenance. So are we able? In the UAE. Are we slowly going to be able to create a name in the culinary world that this is a Dubai oyster?
I think from the very beginning...
or a Fujairah oyster.
Yeah, it's a Fujairah oyster. It's a UAE oyster, but it's very important. Like with oysters, we talk about... In like the wine industry, for example, you talk about the terroir.
Yes.
The vine, you can take the same vine and plant it in South America and from France, and the grape, it's the same type of grape, but it tastes totally different because of the terroir. Oysters are the same because they're filter feeders. So they just...
The environment.
They take from their environment, they build their shell with the minerals that are in the water. So the shell of our oysters are bright white. unlike European oysters, which are grey. It's just purely aesthetic. That doesn't affect the taste, but it's because there's lots of calcite in the water around us, which is from the limestone cliffs that run along by the beach. And so they're very, very localized. You'd have seen the hundreds or maybe thousands of brands of oysters you get out of France. It's all the same species, but they've been grown in different parts, and so there's different currents, there's different salinities, there's different food available to them. They can look and taste quite different. So in the oyster industry, we talk about merroir rather than terroir.
Okay, where does that come from?
I'm not sure if it's a real word.
Okay, so it's an existing term.
Yeah, it is a term. Yeah. So we talk about the merroir of the oyster. They take on their surroundings.
So let's talk a bit about the business side of things. Okay. Currently, you are growing for the local market or for exports?
We're actually currently about 50-50, which is something that we targeted that quite early on. Any food, I often give this advice, like any food business that's starting here, it's actually a relatively small market. And it's a highly competitive market because Dubai in particular has always been this trading hub. So you get produce from all over the world, and that has made the UAE consumers actually very discerning as well. We knew we needed to export because the UAE market is a certain size. Obviously, no matter how good your product is and how fanatically your brand is appreciated, you're not going to get 100% of that market. There's always going to be somebody cheaper. There's always going to be somebody with a different preference. So that's fine. So when you look at being a sustainable business from a numbers point of view, you need to be able to easily cater for a large percentage of this market, but you cannot be reliant on this market, and you need to be exporting in order to reach an economical scale. Because with food production, as you'll know, you need to get to a fairly large scale for it to work.
To compete with the imports, definitely. Yeah.
So then when you're so people always said very early on, like, oh, so your oysters must be super cheap compared to the imported French ones. And I well no, because they are getting charged. They're not paying rent on their concessions. They've got their tax breaks. They're third generation. They've already paid off everything. They're working in cooperatives, so that the scale they're working at and the cost of production is so low. Yes, they've got the cost of the shipping, but it's still they can get them across here relatively cheap. Whereas us, especially in the beginning, we were small, we were a startup, and there's a lot of costs with setting up. So
So then, in terms of targets, would you like that 50-50 to stay, or what's the goal? Where's your expansion? Where are you looking?
Expansion is going to be more export. It has to be. Now this, I mean, and I always say this as well to food producers here. I mean, and from a food security point of view, you need to be producing far more than is required in the local market to have a sustainable business. And then if there is a shock and exports are suddenly closed down, then you have it here, you can keep it here. But you're never going to be able, like the government can't just say, all right, this product's not allowed to be imported anymore, and you must only take the local one, and that's not how it works.
It happens worldwide, though. There's a lot of quotas. There's a lot of protection measures for farmers, especially in production regions. I don't know in oysters, but you see that in.
See, I don't agree with it though. I mean, it's the government should be looking to help their producers be more competitive, rather than trying to block other people coming in.
I think that comes into like the food security, and then which is a national security measure. Some countries like the US is not going to allow another country to grow its wheat. So then they subsidize. But what you said, it creates inefficiencies. It creates sustainability problems. You're not looking at the most sustainable or more efficient. You're just looking to support the existing without fair competition. So yes, Dubai is built on you have to compete. You have to do fair competition, I think.
Yeah.
And that makes the best of, the best projects. So in terms of policy and government policy to enable you to continue what you're doing and maybe expand this industry as a whole, is there any challenges you see when it comes to policy and regulations?
We have had challenges, but I would say they were entirely based on the fact that we're the only oyster farm. And so when we're talking about exports, I sort of very naively at the beginning just went, oh, we're going to export here,
I'll
here,
ship
and there.
you some oysters.
Yeah, I'll ship you some oysters, and not understanding that we weren't allowed to ship live shellfish into other jurisdictions, and that there needed to be government-to-government agreements on how we were monitored, and how the food safety was being handled.
Okay.
And so actually there's been a lot of work over the last few years of we're having to, at the beginning we were obviously self-regulating, but now we're just sort of begging the government to regulate us, which they've responded to, because when we go to export to Europe, for example, they want to see our national shellfish monitoring program and the government monitored testing program for the water parameters and then for the food safety. And the thing is this was all happening, and we were doing it ourselves, and it was also being monitored by the local municipality in Dibba. But in order to get into these other jurisdictions, they needed to see it as federal law, and they needed to see it all.
A whole industry.
It needed to be all laid out and done. So when we were talking to these other jurisdictions, we were showing them, and they were like, okay, look, you're doing everything, but it needs sort of stamped by the government. And so they've responded very, very well, and like we've been super happy with the support we've got from the federal government.
Yeah.
And then also from the local government. And so now actually just in the next few weeks, there's a decree coming out that will put into law this national shellfish monitoring program, which of course is just us.
Just for you.
But it's going to be in place. And then that ticks the box for us that we're being properly regulated. And then we can start accessing all sorts of other jurisdictions around the world.
And I guess that improves the investability into this kind of project.
No, it just suddenly balloons our accessible market.
And looking at scale to reach, price point parity, are you near? What are your plans for the future?
Yeah, so obviously, in any form of farming, the more scale, the better. And so it's all lovely and romantic having a little artisanal oyster farm in your deck chair by the ocean. But
I wouldn't call you guys artisanal at this point.
Thankfully, no, we're not artisanal anymore.
Can we talk numbers? How many oysters a year?
Yeah, so we have just built a new facility in Dibba, and we've just taken a second ocean concession. So we now have a capacity. We can go up to 600,000 or 700,000 oysters a month. We're currently building up to that. This last month we did about 320,000. So this has been a phenomenal growth story because 2 years ago we were doing 30,000 a month.
10x.
In
2 years.
And so it's been stressful scaling up like that, but now we're there, and it's all kind of coming together, and then we can. It gets easier. Like now we've made that big jump. Now we're 165 employees now across in Dibba. We have all the equipment that we need. We've got the facility and now it's just fine tuning and steady growth. So thankfully we're past the explosive growth phase, which my hair has just gone completely white.
In terms of regions worldwide, where are we more suited to target? Is it going to Africa and Asia? Is it going to the West?
Well, this is where I'm just going to click into like a Dubai tourism and business video. Like it's just the fundamental reasons why the UAE is successful of it crossroads between East and West, and just like having so many customers so close. So what we always a big advantage we have when we export is that yes, we're in this pristine environment across in Dibba on the tip of the Indian Ocean, but we're only 90 minutes drive via a brand new 8-lane highway to one of the biggest air freight hubs in the world. So we can harvest in the morning and have our produce in Dubai airport by lunchtime, and we can be in sort of, I think it's like it's something like 2/3 of the world's major capitals same day.
Which is incredible.
And
this is a live product, correct? So it maintains its shelf.
So when you always want the freshest seafood you can get, and so especially with oysters, they're a live product, so it's even more important. So we are very, very well placed to cater to Asia, but then also to Europe. And people are always surprised when I say that we will be focusing on Europe, but we can be competitive, and we've done blind tastings in Hong Kong with sort of the finest oysters from all over the world, and we're first and second sort of every time, and so we know that we can export back into Europe if we want to. And the thing is with oysters, they're a fairly high value product. Oyster bars around the world, we're always looking for a variety, and so there's with a story, and so I think we're quite bullish on being able to go east or west.
We didn't, today investors are looking into the AgTech or the agriculture space. Usually they're talking about climate-controlled indoor agriculture and so on. And of course, agriculture is an entire world between aquaculture and animal farming and open field and green. So in terms of your industry, do you see technology playing a role in the future? Is there anything? I guess logistics is for us, we found that the technology is allowing us to access from B2B much better than, so the middleman and the distributor.
So from a distribution point of view, we're still very traditional. We work with specialized distributors. We find that very important because it's a live product. So you need to have specialized
and would it be producers. Considered niche, basically, in this product? It has its customers that you need to target.
So we have very specialized seafood distributors that we know are going to handle the product appropriately. So it's not like I wouldn't want to sell it on Amazon or what have you. It's like they need a special level of care. It's not just a box that you move from A to B. And so so for logistics wise, we're very traditional at this point in time. From a production point of view, it's incredibly fundamentally very simple of holding oysters in the water, cleaning them, putting them back, and then and sending them to market. But of course, I mean, if you look at the traditional oyster farms of Europe, they're all in estuaries because they're using the tide so that they can walk out and tend to the oysters, whereas we've got barges and we're farming offshore. It's more efficient and you get a better product. So I mean, there's no sort of massive technical leap that we're gonna make beyond that. I think the only thing where we really are using modern tech is in the monitoring of the environment, because so we're very much analyzing the parameters in the ocean and the food levels and what's going on, and that allows us to predict the growth rate of oysters and when they're going to be ready. So so the monitoring side of it helps us just predict and not just be guessing of what's going to be coming when. So
traceability,
it's
a big topic these days.
I mean, we've just always had total traceability built in. And it's and so from the start, because we get little baby oysters, which are called spat, in from hatcheries. And so we know exactly when it was born and which hatchery it's come from and what date we plant it on what part of the farm. And every basket is tagged. And we're not doing that to tick a box and say we have traceability. We're doing that because we need to understand what's where on the farm. And if we have a quality issue or we have like a food safety scare or something, we need to be able to trace back, and just in case there was a problem. And so we need to that for. Again, it's for our own peace of mind, not to tick a box and talk about it. So when you look at a Dibba Bay oyster box, on our label, there's actually a code on it, and from that code we know which hatchery the spat came from and which part of the farm it was grown on and which tank it was depurated in at the end, and so we know exactly how old it is and what its characteristics are. So yeah, we have full traceability just baked in from the beginning.
Dibba Bay oysters made me for the first time Google how many oysters is too many oysters to eat in one sitting.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit about the nutrition profile of this?
Yeah. So oysters in general, they are literally a superfood. They are chock full of minerals and vitamins, and they're an extremely healthy food.
In terms of protein,
they're very high in protein. So I talked about the muscle. So our oysters are actually much higher in protein than most other oysters because we have this big overdeveloped muscle, the scallop muscle in the middle of it. So like 2 or 3 grams of protein in one of our oysters.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. So it's just the healthiest, cleanest type of protein. So it's.
I've noticed usually people are eating them raw.
Yeah.
This is the main way to consume oysters.
Yeah. That's sort of the European way. Yes. Whereas we actually we're selling quite a lot of much larger oysters into particularly the Chinese community here in Dubai, and we're now exporting to Hong Kong as well. And so traditionally you'll cook these bigger oysters. So we sell the whole range in sizes from starting at about 45 grams all the way up to 150 grams. And so you would tend to eat the smaller ones and cook the bigger ones. So.
Where can consumers find your products?
So we have very good market penetration here in Dubai. We believe we've got it's very hard with the statistics here, but we believe we've got about a 40% market share now, which we're super proud of.
Amazing.
We are in most supermarket chains, so you'll find us in Carrefour, Spinneys, Waitrose. We have our own shops, well, 2, but we've got our original farm shop, which is in Sakim 1, where you can order from them. We're on Deliveroo there, or you can come down and eat in.
Yeah, sunsets are gorgeous.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous location. And then we've just opened a new place in JBR, which is licensed. So that's you can come down and have a platter of oysters and a glass of wine, which is which is kind of the missing link for a lot of people.
Yeah. They go well together.
So you'll and then of course we have a big HoReCa distribution with our distribution partners, and so we're in a whole range of brunches and a la carte menus. So you most seafood restaurants, there's a good chance we'll be there. So.
Climate change now is a big topic, and obviously it affects the parameters, especially. You are out in the open ocean. Yeah. Can you tell us a bit more about the challenges or risks there?
I mean, obviously with global warming, it's changing environments. So especially in places like Europe, little changes are affecting where people have been producing certain vegetables or animals, whatever, in that area for a very long time, and they're very suited to that area. As I've mentioned earlier, the oyster species that we're using is highly adaptive, and it's been used. The reason it's been so successful across the world, I mean, the same species of oyster is being grown it's from the sort of Japan, China area, the Pacific. But it's been introduced and successfully grown in Alaska. And then it's been introduced and successfully grown in Fujairah. Yeah. So the temperature range there is enormous, and this is part of the solution about how you adapt to climate change. Is you need to take a fresh look of what you can grow where. You can't just keep carrying on doing exactly what you were doing. You have to take a fresh look and go, what is, and this is very appropriate for the UAE. What can you grow here? Not and what suits the environment. Not so. This is the difference between just investing in a big greenhouse and growing whatever you feel like. It's what can you grow in the open air. Yes. So we are not overly concerned with a small fluctuation in the temperature because we've selected a species that can handle that sort of temperature range. We're still well within the parameters of what the species can handle. So unless there's something enormous that shifts, then we're in a pretty good place. That's great to hear. Ramie, thank you so much for coming in today, and we look forward to always hearing about the future of Dibba Bay oysters. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you.